January in D.C. experienced another National March for Life, the 49th March for Life to be specific. Hundreds of thousands came, as is the case every year, and marched in spite of temperatures in the teens and Omicron omnipresent. Didn't matter. Activists for Life come every year and march to the Supreme Court to raise awareness for the unborn. The march this year highlighted the Dobbs versus Mississippi case, a case which may be the case that actually overturns Roe v. Wade, thus returning the issue of abortion back to the states. The march also highlighted this theme this year: equality begins in the womb. From our nation's inception, our founding fathers recognized each one of us as equal in our right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And because of this, Americans have fought for centuries to advance equality for every person, regardless of race, sex, or disability status. It's taken centuries, but discrimination is now acknowledged as unacceptable, it seems, in just about everywhere in America, except for one place: in the womb. For in the womb, discrimination happens every day, routinely. Discrimination such as aborting a baby with Down syndrome or aborting a baby girl over a baby boy. I'm Terry Gilberg, and this is Timeline with Terry. Today's Timeline topic: discriminating against the unborn.
CTA is a call to action to all conservatives to save America from left-wing radicals.
Nearly 45% of the U.S. workforce already have plans for job hopping in 2021. Now, many of those 70 million job hoppers are just fed up, and they're ready to work somewhere else, somewhere where they will be free. Maybe it's time for your talents to go to a city or a company that actually values your freedom. Post your resume on redballoon.org so that you can connect with this ever-growing list of free speech employers who would love to hire you.
Welcome back to Timeline with Terry, the show where we invite expert guests to do deep dives into the important and vexing issues of our day, such as the Dobbs versus Mississippi case and how equality begins in the womb. I've invited pro-life marcher and activist who participates every year here in Washington, D.C. to come on the program. She's also an expert on the life of Dr. Bernard Nathanson, once known as America's abortion king. Dr. Nathanson was the co-founder of NARAL, the National Association for the Repeal of Abortion Laws. My guest is Terry Beatley, another Terry, who tells the story of Dr. Nathanson and how he went into a conversion from his pro-abort stance. Welcome to Timeline with Terry, Terry Beatley. Nice to have you.
Hey, Terry, I'm glad to be on with you today. It's my pleasure.
Well, finally, I've been meaning to get you on, and the March of Life, we bumped into each other here in D.C., and it was quite the day. Temps in the teens, as you'll recall, and Omicron omnipresent, people still scared of it, but it was great seeing you. Before we get into the specifics of Dr. Bernard Nathanson and what you've been doing as an activist to bring his message to the world, not just the nation, tell us about what your feelings were this year about the March for Life.
I was very encouraged. Number one, there's so many young people, we're talking about tens of thousands. Well,
correct.
Yeah, at least tens of thousands. And, I've seen the march before, when was it, last year? Yeah.
I think last year it was canceled.
It canceled the year before when
The year
President
before.
Trump spoke, yeah. And it was absolutely massive. So it would be fair to say hundreds of thousands of young people there. But the same thing this year, just tens of thousands. It's very, very encouraging because they do know what the truth is, or at least many young people. And I believe they will carry it over the line, which makes the legacy of Dr. Bernard Nathanson all the more important.
Well, I loved seeing so many young people. I had heard many, many times that they come out. This time I saw it up close and personal, and they were in droves. There was also marchers that are secular for pro-life, or Democrats for pro-life. That was very nice to see. Did you see those groups?
I didn't see them this year, but I've seen them in the past. And I mean, I think it'd be fantastic if one day two political parties are fighting to be the most pro-life. Don't know if that's ever going to happen, but God bless those who are trying. And talking about the young people, Friday morning before the march, I was, all this was prearranged. I actually taught about 1,400 or 1,500 Catholic youth up in the Diocese of La Crosse, Wisconsin. So they live streamed me up there, yeah, for about 50 minutes. Taught 1,500 young people, and we were getting good reviews coming back in from the teachers who were texting the man who organized this. So one of our goals is to do this all across America, either in person or live stream. So
what was it that you were teaching them?
Teaching them all about the true story, much of what we're going to go over today, the true story of Dr. Bernard Nathanson, from death to life in Christ. How the doctor who was once known as America's abortion king, the father of America's industry of abortion, what people don't know is that he did a 180-degree turn, and he wanted everybody to know the truth of what he did, the lies, deception, propaganda, but then also his conversion story, including later on converting and becoming a follower of Jesus Christ.
We'll get to that in a minute, because that is a very long story, and you're the pro at it. You've been selected, I guess, perhaps even from above, to give this story not just to all Americans, but to the world. Before we get into that, though, Terry, I want your opinion on what you think is going to happen with the decision on Dobbs v. Mississippi. This is a real critical decision, and there weren't as many people on December 1st of 2021 at the Supreme Court like there was for the March for Life almost a month later, a little bit more than a month later, but there were thousands as well. They all came out to hear the oral arguments, pro-life and pro-abort. Where do you think, now that the justices have heard these arguments on this particular case, where do you think it will go? Will they eventually rule on the side of life, which basically means, in case our audience don't know, and I want you to elaborate, that the abortion issue will then go back to the states for deciding? What do you think they'll do?
Well, I was actually just going to say that. I mean, what they should do, what the justices should do, is send it back to the states. It was unfairly stolen from the right of the people to make this kind of decision. It's nowhere in the Constitution. So these 9 unelected people back in the early 70s made law, and they made up this law. We all know it. And it's funny that we're talking about this today, because actually today shipped one of the key lawyers said, Terry, have you ever sent your book to the Supreme Court justices? And I said, no. And he said, get 9 books today, overnighted to Washington, D.C. So they're in the mail. And the reason, it was Alan Parker. Alan Parker is the attorney who, in 2003, 30 years after Roe v. Wade, represented Roe, that's Norma McCorvey, when she wanted to overturn the Roe v. Wade decision. Well, what's that about? This is another story that most Americans don't know. Roe never had an abortion, and she wanted to overturn the Roe v. Wade decision. Well, her attorney wrote an appendix for my book, and his good friend, another attorney, Sam Casey. And I'm actually just going to read the 6 bullet points, because these are the things the 6 erroneous assumptions that the court made, Terry, back in the early 70s.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Hold it up. It's right there.
And by the way, I brought it for our audience as well to see, because I didn't know if you would have your book handy. Go ahead, Terry.
And well, I want people to get the book and read it and then share it. And they can get it at abortionking.com. And this is what, these are the 6 points that these 2 attorneys put in the book. So it's called the Roe v. Wade, a failed exercise in assumicide. The justices assumed 6 erroneous things. Number 1, we can't know what a human being is and when life begins. Yes, we do, and yes, we do, right? That's number 1. Number 2, abortion is health care involving a normal, responsible doctor-patient relationship. And the book fleshes this out. They wrote, paragraphs, and it's very easy to read. But that's not true, and they've been able to prove it, that there's not a normal relationship between, the woman walks in, and if she's lucky to even talk to the doctor, many times there's not even a conversation, right? Number 3, motherhood and child rearing force upon the woman a distressful life and future. Well, that's not true, because number 1, she can provide adoption, a future in her life via adoption, and be done with that child, right? That's better than killing that person. The next one is an abortion decision is truly voluntary and fully informed. That's not true. Many women are coerced. And then 5, the risk to the women's health and life was far greater in carrying the child to full term than having an abortion. That was just a bald-faced lie. Yeah, that was a complete lie. And they twisted the stats. And lastly, which this is almost comical in a way, that a woman faces significant difficulties as a result of a cultural stigma to unwed motherhood. Well, that may have been so 35, 40 years ago, but say it ain't so anymore, right? So it's all, these were assumptions that the court made. And I do want to mention one thing. This is something most people don't know about, going back to motherhood and child rearing force upon a woman a distressful life and future. In all 50 states now, there are baby Moses laws in all 50 states. Now, the rules change. It could be a day, could be 2 weeks, could be a month. But a woman can drop off her infant at a fire station, a police station, or a hospital. I think in most states it's all 3. No charges. No charges on abandonment. So she could literally give birth to the baby, drop him off at the fire department, and call it a day, and she won't be charged with it. But there's no reason to kill the baby, for God's sake.
Right.
So that's what I got to say about Roe.
Right. Most Americans don't know that is a fact in all 50 states. Yes. And I'm glad you brought that up. One of the biggest assumptions, and just a bald-faced lie, is that we can't know what's in there. Well, my response to that, even back in 1973, well, it isn't a frog in there. It isn't a little mouse in there. What the heck do you think it is, justices? But, they went with the tissue thing, or we don't know yet, or whatever. And then it all changed, Terry. The advent of the ultrasound.
Right. That's it.
Right. All right.
And that's where Dr. Nathanson enters this equation again.
I hope that, and pray, and I know you do too, that it comes down in our favor, the favor of life. I believe 2 things have to happen. One, though, now that they've taken the case, of course, they have to adjudicate on it, and they have to cover 2 things from my understanding. One, they have to look at Roe straight in the eye and say what happened in 1973 was then. It was incorrect. It wasn't a good law. It was, as you just pointed out, these six assumptions, and therefore we need to clean that up. The court needs to get right by that. Okay, right. And the second thing is that they have to acknowledge, therefore, in cleaning up the court, that the issues of life and death are issues for the states. If I kill somebody, and it's in the state of, Montana, I'm tried in Montana. Right. I'm not tried through the Supreme Court, right? Issues of life and death, euthanasia. Even the case that I reported on a long time ago, but reported a lot on, the Terry Schiavo case in Florida. That wasn't a Supreme Court case. That was a life and death case. So with issues of abortion, it's life and death, and that would be a state matter. Now, and in the meantime, and I'd like you to elaborate on that, over these years, states have done their own laws on time to terminate or not. So in the meantime, the states haven't exactly been sitting on their hands waiting for Roe to come back to them. There have been issues with regard to their own laws and adjudication on this that have gone along during these 45 years, 9 years almost, right?
Oh, absolutely. And this, all states are different. What I thought was quite interesting, for lack of a better word, when they saw Kavanaugh come onto the court, that's when things started revving up, because they began, and then with Barrett coming on, that Roe could fall. And they began preparing. So as, moms and dads are busy taking their kids to soccer and doing all the things families are supposed to do, NARAL and Planned Parenthood, the whole abortion lobby, they're not sitting still. So they got connected with all their Democrat politicians who support this culture of death, and they began trying and succeeding in many states. The classic example, of course, is Governor Cuomo lighting up the World Trade Center in baby girl pink, right? When they passed that, you have permission to kill babies all 9 months of pregnancy for any reason whatsoever. And so what I say is that they're very aggressive. The pro-abortion side, they're so aggressive. It many times seems like they're 2 steps ahead. They're well funded, while the pro-life side. I mean, we're activists as well. I'm not trying to be critical on that, but they're premeditating. But I believe, and that's again, and I know we're going to come to it, why Nathanson's legacy is so key, because God says, "My people perish for lack of knowledge." When America understands that this entire industry of death is based on lies, propaganda, manipulation, the people in the mushy middle, maybe not the hard lefties who brag about their abortions, but the millions of people in the mushy middle, they will be forced, I'm using that word loosely, to reconsider, to re-examine permissive abortion. Okay? Mm-hmm. So once they know the odious tactics that were used, those odious tactics will compel those people who are uneasy to re-examine the issue. So then finally, if that issue is back to the states, what do I think will happen? There are going to be a handful of states that'll boast that, hey, all 9 months of pregnancy, you can come to this state, New York, and kill your baby. That
California.
Will be how it is.
California.
It's going to be bizarre. Then you're going to have other states that will be like, we're the pro-life sanctuary state. But there will be states, and it'll become, sadly, a thriving industry for that state, just like it became in January 1970 for the state of New York. April 1970. That's when they did away with a 140-year-old law that protected babies in the womb. No abortion in the state of New York until they manipulated, lied, propagandized, and all this. And then Governor Nelson Rockefeller signed it into law,
exactly.
April 1970.
1970, I remember. About
300,000 women descended upon the state because, hey, they were just told it's a blob of tissue, right, Terry? Right? Mm-hmm. And it became, you do the math, because the abortion act, it's interesting, because abortion prices really haven't kept up with inflation. But I pulled out my calculator here to drive the point home. So if 250,000 people begin ascending into New York State in 1970 for their legal abortions, it's now okay to kill your baby. And let's just say it costs $250. That's a $62 million industry at the click of your finger. Is that
back in 1970, and it's only gotten worse over time.
That's right.
When we come back from the break, Terry, we need to take a quick break. I'm speaking with Terry Beatley. We're going to get into who was Bernard Nathanson. Many Americans have never heard of him. What difference does it make? He's long deceased now, but it makes a big difference, and you're going to explain it right after the break. This is Timeline with Terry. I'm Terry Gilberg with my special guest, pro-life activist Terry Beatley, and an expert on the then called abortion king, Dr. Bernard Nathanson. Stick around.
Hello, I'm Mike Lindell, CEO of MyPillow. Retailers, shopping channels, and now even banks have tried to cancel myself and MyPillow. During these times, your support has meant everything to us. My employees and I want to personally thank each and every one of you by passing the savings directly on to you. For example, you can get my Giza Dream bed sheets for as low as $39.99 a set. That's a savings of 60% and the lowest price in history. And remember, they're made with the world's best cotton, grown where the Sahara Desert, the Mediterranean Sea, and the Nile River all meet. They come with my 10-year warranty, and I guarantee they'll be the most comfortable sheets you'll ever own. So go to mypillow.com now and use the promo code on your screen or call the 1-800 number below to get my Giza Dream bed sheets for as low as $39.99, the lowest price in history. If you do it right now, I'm also going to include a free gift with your purchase. Thank you and God bless.
The principles of liberty, freedom, and the tenets of our constitutional republic are under attack. That's why we are building freedomsquare.com. Freedomsquare.com, designed to unite freedom-loving Americans. Freedomsquare.com. Freedom lives here.
Are you tired of having to grunt, wince, and sigh every time you sit down on the couch? Omekwa Organics has got you covered with the Protected Tea, an organic herbal blend for inflammation, immunity, and heart health. Naturally boost your immune system and reduce stress. So get on up and dance, because you know that Omekwa Organics has got you protected. Visit our link in the description for money off your first bag of Protected Tea.
Charlize, luxury skincare for real women, because you're worth it.
Grits and Eggs Breakfast Kitchen, where every dish has fresh and delicious farm-to-table ingredients that are sure to uplift your taste buds. Experience our creamy grits topped with grilled shrimp in our homemade shrimp sauce. Try our fried whole chicken wings or our marinated lamb chops cooked to your perfection. Come try Costa Coffee. It's the best coffee you've never tasted. Grits and Eggs Breakfast Kitchen, located at 3205 Cumberland Boulevard, Southeast, Suite 105 in Atlanta. Grits and Eggs Breakfast Kitchen. Enter as strangers, leave as friends. Cheers.
Welcome back. You're watching Timeline with Terry. I'm Terry Gilberg here on Conservative Television of America. We're glad you're on board. I'm speaking with pro-life activist and an expert on Dr. Bernard Nathanson. Who was he? Well, he's long deceased, but at the time he was known as America's abortion king. And Terry Beatley has a very interesting story on how she met Dr. Bernard Nathanson and what she promised to him at his deathbed. Terry, welcome back to Timeline with Terry. We have two Terrys today. Take us through your relationship with him, how you learned about him, and why you wanted his message, which became pro-life, out there, not just for all of America, but for the world.
Yeah, sparing lots of details because we don't have time for all that, but I was at a prayer vigil in, November 2009, and this was after years of researching the history of Planned Parenthood, its founder, Margaret Sanger. One of the things she unleashed onto America called the Negro Project, a very racist population control plan. I had been going into churches, this was primarily in Virginia, and some were more African-American churches, and sharing the history of all this. And the people so encouraged me to continue doing this. And they were telling me they had no idea about this legacy of Margaret Sanger and racism and all this, and how many black children had been, killed by abortion in this country. And so months later, I'm now at this prayer vigil, and I'm fervently asking God what he wants me to do with all this information and these amazing experiences of crossing the racial divide crossing in a way like the political divide. And all I could hear, and I do mean it like literally, but not literally, like in my spirit, was go interview Dr. Bernard Nathanson. And I knew who Nathanson was. I had read one of his books. And I remember sitting back in my chair and I'm like looking up and I'm saying, God, why would Dr. Bernard Nathanson ever say yes to my request for an interview?
Because at the time he was ill, right? Wasn't he already ill?
Let's see. Well, yes, at that time he was. Yeah. So I find his telephone number. I call up to New York. He lived in Manhattan, New York. I call up there. His wife answers, and she said, Terry, she said, my husband's 83 years old. He's terminally ill with cancer. And she said, all I can tell you to do is put your request in writing, fax it up here, and I'll present it to him. But she said, don't get your hopes up because he has not granted an interview in well over a year. Wow. And I'm like, okay. So I write this little letter, and it's in the book. And let's see. I fax it up there, and I pray and I pray and pray over the letter. And she calls me back a couple days later, and she said, to her amazement, he said yes. And she asked if I could fly up there. And to check this out, she asked if I could fly to New York on December 1st, which is 2009. That's exactly 12 years earlier than when the Supreme Court hears the Dobbs case that may overturn Roe v. Wade.
You mean this past December 2021? I see.
12 years since I shook Dr. Nathanson's hand and made this old dying man a very audacious promise. I spent 1 hour with him, asked him, you're the reporter, not me. I was just a pretend reporter. So I went up there with a list of questions. I'm the very amateur reporter. So I asked him all the questions. We have this Q&A that goes on for about an hour, and then he was very frail, and he couldn't stand any more than a 60-minute interview, especially with my energy. And at the end, I just felt such compassion for this old dying man. I said, Dr. Nathanson, if you have a message for America, because I didn't know if he'd say, look, my day is done. You pro-lifers take it from here. I had no idea. And nor did I go.
What did he say?
Yeah, he said yes. He said, no, if you have a message for America, tell me what it is. And I promise you, I'll deliver it across our country until it becomes common knowledge or until Roe v. Wade is overturned, whichever one comes first. And so he said, yes. He said, continue teaching the strategy of how I deceived America. And then it's an 8-point strategy, which hopefully we'll have time to go over that. And then he said, tell America that the co-founder of NARAL says to love one another. Abortion's not love. Stop the killing. The world needs more love, and I'm all about love now. And
I see.
And I reached over and I shook his hand, and naively I said, Dr. Nathanson, I'm going to get it done. And his wife walked me to the door, and she's a little tiny lady, and the door closed. She's like, well, good luck on that promise, Terry. And the door closed real slowly. And I remember standing there in Manhattan, New York, thinking, oh my gosh, what have I just done? Because I shook the man's hand. I made him a promise. I didn't know how I was going to get this done, but our God knows. He knew then, and he's doing it now, and he's moving this forward.
Now, I read in your book, and in fact, it's the title of your book, a statement, a question that Dr. Nathanson had said. What if we've been wrong? What if we had been wrong about the whole abortion industry? Now, when I studied his life, correct me if I'm wrong, it was 2 years after Roe, so it was around 1975, when he had that moment that I could have had a V8 moment, or his coming to Jesus moment, or the Red Sea parted in his head, and he said, I'm wrong, I think I'm wrong about this. And I think it was 2 years after, and I think it was... It wasn't even 2 years, but it was with the advent, right, of the ultrasound, the brand new technology where you could actually see what is actually in utero. Do I have all that right? And he went and said, wow.
Right, yeah. The only thing is the date, and I want to go over the date.
What is the date then?
Or the year. So the year we get Roe v. Wade, January 22nd, 1973.
Correct.
He had already quit the month earlier, running the largest abortion mill in the Western Hemisphere. They were killing about 900 babies per week, okay, which back then were huge numbers. Today, it's hardly anything. But he's exhausted, but he's still an abortionist. But he quits. He goes to be chief of obstetrics at St. Luke's Hospital in New York City. So in January, Roe comes down. He celebrates Roe v. Wade. He's on the media. He's being interviewed or whatever. Mm-hmm. However, about 6 months or so later, that's when the hospital rolls in a new technology, real-time ultrasound. And that's when this epiphany, it's kind of like if you can imagine, the reality of real-time ultrasound. So when I went to New York, I was thinking he had never seen a baby on ultrasound. I was wrong. He had seen the pictures, but just the photographs, which are real grainy, and you can almost make it be whatever you want it to be, a baby or not.
Sure.
But you can't deny that on real-time ultrasound. So he's seeing the baby. This man was the father of the industry. His lies, to a large degree, deceived the Supreme Court justices and millions of people in the American public. And he's seeing the baby yawn, stretch, suck her thumb, wiggle her toes. And he began bonding with the baby. Those were his words to me. And he said, Terry, real-time ultrasound was the bomb. It made everything come alive.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Well,
so he's bonding with seeing this in utero baby and completely changes his mind, has this
and
epiphany.
keep in mind, he was an atheist. Okay, it wasn't like, Christianity converted him at that point. He was an atheist, and the science, which is that's another part of why Nathanson's story is so relevant to today. Because remember, according to our President Joe Biden, we're supposed to follow the science. Well, let's walk that dog with President Joe Biden. Let's walk it with science. Well, my God, the science converted the father of America's abortion industry to become 100% unequivocally pro-life. So by the beginning of 1979, Dr. Nathanson could not figure out any reason why any woman would ever have to kill her child. So even if her health was in danger, by all means, remove the baby. But don't remove the baby with the intention of crushing its skull, sucking out its brains, pulling its arms, and get the baby out, but try to preserve the life of the baby as well. But the primary life at that moment would be the mother's. So, and that's the beginning of his whole conversion. Yeah.
All right, let's go back. Let's go back because there's a lot to cover. And what makes him so especially interesting prior to the conversion is what he did, his strategizing to propagandize, to convert the media, get the media on his side, to get politicians on his side, to get those running in the future, candidates for political office on his side, and to get the Catholic Church in America on his side. So take it away. We'll go up to this break, and then we'll pick it up on the backside of this break as well with his strategy. Very, very smart, and it worked. And then he threw it all away and converted. Go ahead.
That's right. And I give a lot of the details in the book, What If We've Been Wrong? I just want to throw it out there, abortionking.com. Because, I promote this because having made that promise to teach America, America needs to get reading. And it's a real easy story. It's a real, and someone very near and dear to Dr. Nathanson, this person said, Terry, let me read your book script, the manuscript before I went to publication. And this person tweaked it a little bit. And she's like, Terry, this is perfect because it's at almost like a 10th grade reading level. So the 8-point strategy, the first thing they did was they hired a public relations firm to the tune of $7,500. And they came up with everything I'm going to share with you. And the PR firm said, the first thing you need to do is frame the debate. And they framed it around choice. And I was looking down because I'm going to show you this little fact check booklet, which people can get at Hosea Initiative. Maybe we can hold that website up. but this is the abbreviated version. So point one, they framed the debate, and they framed it around choice. Because the PR firm knows
everybody wants a choice, right? Who doesn't want a choice?
Exactly. You had the choice to have an American flag behind you, or or a basket of flowers or whatever. Think about how many choices of orange juice. Americans love choices. All right, choice. Very popular. Second thing, they crafted the cynical slogans. And those slogans are things like my body, my choice, every baby a wanted baby, things like that. Most of the slogans are still in use today. And Nathanson said they would sit around the table and they would kind of laugh when they came up with a slogan that they thought would really appeal to the American public.
Is that right? Wow.
The next thing they did, which you can appreciate this, which of course you don't fit in this bracket, but they would manipulate the complicit media. The complicit media. Most reporters, not you, but most reporters are lazy. And he picked up on that years ago. And so because he was an OBGYN with MD after his name, all he had to do is share stats, share polling, say the lies. And most of the reporters, Terry, hardly ever question him.
Right, because he's the authority figure on the matter, right? He's a doctor, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And most of the reporters were young females who were probably pro-abortion or, using their words, pro-choice minded. So, and so they would take everything he had. Number four, he would fabricate the facts, which there's another word for that, lies. Okay. And he would tell the media that, look, we have an epidemic on our hands. Over 1 million women a year having back alley abortions, and 5,000 to 10,000 women a year are dying. All those numbers were false, and not just a little bit false. I mean, I think the strategy was tell a lie that would be so flippin' big, nobody would ever think you were lying. So there were never 1 million illegal abortions happening. He said on the high side, and he wrote about this too in one of his books, on the high side it was 200 to 250, low side single digits are up into the 20s. Never 5,000 to 10,000 women a year dying. Never, ever, ever. So all those women who hold up the coat hanger sign, we can't go back to yesteryear or the thousands. It's like all they're doing is quoting the lies of Nathanson. So the real number was 99,000 illegal abortions, single digits up to up to 200 per year, but never in the thousands. The other thing was, and when I sat beside him, I said, Dr. Nathanson, where did you get the 60% polling number that 60% of Americans want abortion on demand legalized? I'll never forget it. In these frail
That's a lot. That's a lot.
Well, yeah, and the PR firm said that he had to be able to quote stats above 50%. Why? Because intuitively we don't like being in a
in the middle
minority. Yeah.
So he made up 60%. He just out of whole cloth
raised his hand up in the air and he said, Terry, I pulled it out of thin air. The real number was 0.1% of Americans wanted abortion on demand legalized.
Amazing. Right.
And we're just
hold on to that thought. We're up on a break, Terry Beatley. We're talking about the then America's abortion king who had a major mea culpa and talked to Terry Beatley on his deathbed and said, please take my message of pro-life to America. Terry Beatley, don't go away. America, don't go away. You're listening to and watching Timeline with Terry here on Conservative Television of America. I'll be right back.
CTA is a call to action to all conservatives to save America from left-wing radicals.
Nearly 45% of the U.S. workforce already have plans for job hopping in 2021. Now, many of those 70 million job hoppers are just fed up, and they're ready to work somewhere else. Somewhere where they will be free. Maybe it's time for your talents to go to a city or a company that actually values your freedom. Post your resume on redballoon.org so that you can connect with this ever-growing list of free speech employers who would love to hire you.
Welcome back to Timeline with Terry. I'm Terry Gilberg, and my very special guest today is another Terry. Her name is Terry Beatley. You might know her because she's a pro-life activist and an expert on the then America's abortion king, a man named Dr. Bernard Nathanson. She's reviewing his life and how he himself pushed strategies so that America would get comfortable with abortion and that abortion would become commonplace in America. He also had a Catholic strategy to change the hearts and minds of the Catholic Church in America for abortion, not against abortion, but for abortion. So Terry, take it away and continue on from our last segment. You were laying out his strategies, which were brilliant and which worked. And part of them was to persuade the media.
Right, that's right. And of course, so he used the complicit media, told these false facts, false polling. Point number 6 was he would then repeat the lies over and over. And we all know that if you repeat lies long enough in the media, it begins to sound like the truth. And point number 7, he would justify decriminalizing abortion. He would say, look, the women who are going to have abortions, they're going to do it whether it's illegal or legal. And anybody can think through this and know that that's a false statement. If you make something legal, it's going to drive up demand. You know, if I could drive 85 miles per hour to the grocery store, I would drive 85 miles per hour to the grocery store. I would. And I've learned a hard lesson that I can't. But anyway, so he would justify. So as soon as it became legal with Roe v. Wade, nationally, it became the self-fulfilling lie. Within a short number of years, we really were tapping out at 1.5 million legal abortions. So from 98,000 to 1.5 million because it became legalized or decriminalized. And then lastly, point number 8 is the Catholic strategy. Remember, NARAL started in New York. Their number one goal, immediate goal, was to overturn that 140-year-old law in New York that protected babies. Mm-hmm. And they weren't the only ones fighting for this, but they were one of the leaders. And they flipped it in 18 months. But they had a problem, though, in New York. New York has so many Catholics. And since the beginning of the Catholic Church, going back, basically 2,000 years ago, abortion has always been called out as an intrinsic evil. Unequivocally, nothing's changed. The politicians have changed, but the church hasn't changed. And so they knew that they had to get enough Catholics to be willing to vote for pro-abortion candidates. And it would probably take way too much time. Get the book. I go into great details. Get the fact check booklet. But I can go over the 4 highlights if you want me to.
Well, one of the things that struck me was if they could get Catholics to maybe straddle the fence in their own mind and get politicians to straddle the fence in their own mind and then say, well, in my own mind, I'm personally against it, but I'm a politician and I represent all the people, including atheists, and therefore we have to have this because all the people need to be included. In other words, taking that common denominator down to the intrinsic evil, because there will always be somebody that wants abortion, therefore we have to have it. But for me, I don't personally want it in my life because I'm so sanctimonious, right? This was the thinking. And he taught this thinking, if I've got it right. Am I right?
You just perfectly described the straddle, right? Which was one of the 4 elements or tactics of the Catholic strategy. You just perfectly articulated it. And what most people don't realize was it was an actual tactic. They named it the Catholic strategy, the whole plan, and they named it the Catholic straddle. So when I give my public presentations, I use a picture of a cat straddling a fence. It's got its legs on both sides. But this is what kept. There were plenty of Catholics who had already been contracepting for years, had bought into the propaganda of Margaret Sanger, and had already kind of walked away. They were the Kennedy Catholics. I don't want to get too long-winded, but we give whole seminars just on the Catholic strategy. But NARAL was smart enough to know that they still needed the pro-life Catholics. They needed their votes because Lawrence Lader, the director of NARAL, he knew that just as quickly as they overturned the pro-life law and made New York the abortion capital of the Western Hemisphere, that if they didn't get enough people supporting it politically, they could the pro-lifers could undo it very quickly. So deception, deceit was a key element.
And if I remember right, Senator Ted Kennedy, not Edward Kennedy, Ted Kennedy, was very much a straddler. I think I even remember him saying, well, look, it's not for me and my family, right? But for the people of America, they have to have a right to choose. And those women have to have a right to choose because, after all, I am representing people. And so therefore, I'm going to be pro-abort, but never would I have it in my family. And it worked beautifully, even with the Kennedys. And I really believe it was Ted Kennedy that kind of promoted that. And other politicians have followed suit. Look at Nancy Pelosi today, Terry. Look at Joe Biden today. I mean, and don't get me started on the others more locally, but they're still, that's alive and well, and it works beautifully.
Well, and it's the total exploitation of women. It's the deceit. I'm talking deceit at the highest levels. The Supreme Court justices, I mean, if there were any of those guys back then who were maybe a little like, which way, but they're believing a lot of the data that NARAL, Lawrence Lader, and the attorney from NARAL submitted to the Supreme Court, it was all lies. And one of Dr. Nathanson's most powerful quotes, and if we still have time, I want to share this with your audience. So powerful, and it's where the name of my book comes from, What If We've Been Wrong? Right before I went to publication, his wife called and she said, Terry, I have some things that you may be interested in, because by this point, Dr. Nathanson had already passed. And she said, I have his resignation letter from NARAL. And she said, would you want a copy of it? I'm like, yeah. So it ends with this. So here's Nathanson, 2 years. Oh, that's where you got the 2-year thing. He resigned from NARAL 2 years after Roe v. Wade. That's where you got the 2-year thing.
Because I knew there was a 2 years in there, about 1975, right?
Yeah, so he, for 2 years after Roe came down, he was begging NARAL to reconsider what they'd done because they had a medical, ethical, moral issue on their hands. He was now like, it's a baby. We're killing human life. We can't deny this anymore. But anyway, so he ends the letter to NARAL like this. That perfectly ties in with what the Supreme Court is now considering, right? The Dobbs case. The judgments of the Supreme Court were never meant to be infallible or eternal. And what if we've been wrong? If the court should soon reverse itself in the light of changing times and or new scientific evidence, what an incalculable injustice will have been perpetrated. What an immeasurable, irretrievable loss will have been suffered. The annual dues to NARAL are $10 a year, and the hubris, the arrogance of certainty. I can no longer afford those dues. Dr. Bernard Nathanson.
So the upshot is he can't and won't even afford $10 because of his mea culpa and conversion. What if we were wrong?
That's right. That's it. And
well, you led the parade, Dr. Nathanson. I hope you're up there. You led the parade in being wrong.
Right.
And then he was right later.
And then he was right. And so why is all this so relevant today? Number one, young people don't like deception. They don't like to be lied to. Well, in fact, nobody likes to be lied to, right? And so we believe that, and we already have the evidence, that when more and more people have this historical proof right from the original source, he left it all. He left it in writing, he left it on audio, video, and he left it in the interview that I had with him. I'm just I'm commissioned, I guess God commissioned me, because I didn't even think I could go to New York, and I definitely didn't go up there to make the man a promise. So number one, it can change hearts and minds, because stories compel, convict, and convert hearts. Stories do. And this
real
is not
stories,
a story. It's a true story. And everybody, there's not one person in this country that has not been affected by abortion, whether you've had an abortion, whether you've pushed a girlfriend or a wife to go have an abortion, or or you voted for abortion. Everybody's been affected in some. So my overall message is this. It's a two-part thing. Well, maybe more than two parts. God says, my people perish for lack of knowledge. We're about ready to lose our country and everything that we find valuable because we've been spitting in the face of God for 50 years. People who, like me, until I was in my early 40s, I was apathetic about the abortion issue. I knew I'd never have one, but I hadn't given it any more thought. I was apathetic. I was willfully ignorant, kind of like I'd never seen a picture of an abortion. And when I finally did, I'm like, talk about mea culpa. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been
You must have been appalled.
I was absolutely appalled. And then lastly, we need to be repenting for participation. That could be voting. And like I said, I believe his story will lead people. I believe it could actually lead our nation to a 2 Chronicles 7:14. Because God's word says, if my people, he doesn't even include the atheists in this. If my people who are called by my name would humble themselves, seek my face, repent for those three things I just named, and turn from their wicked way, stop voting for pro-abortion candidates, for God's sake. Christ hung on the cross for that sin. And God says, then I will hear from heaven and heal their land. I honestly believe, and it's the only reason why I'm still doing what I do, that God's moving this forward. It took 12 years to even get the organization that I represent, Hosea Initiative. That's like Hosea in the Bible, HOSEA, HoseaInitiative.org. It's taken this long and a beautiful way to write the book and build the seminars and get our educational curriculum, and it goes on and on and on. That's right. Build up credentials. We're endorsed by umpteen different, very credible people. I didn't pick up your endorsement. And let's see. And now we're poised to lose our country. So the big billion-dollar question is, if America can learn this part of history, will America will God's people, I'm not even going to hold it on the backs of the atheists, will God's people, the Jewish people, and people who claim Christ as their Savior, Terry, will they repent? So God will hear from heaven, right? And who does God hear from? The saints, the angels, and if you believe that all that can happen, I believe it's Blessed Mother Mary saying, God, your people down there have finally repented. It's not the same 500,000 that go to the march every year. It's millions of people, God. And God says, and then I will hear from heaven and I will heal. I believe this is biblical and it must happen. And God's going to make beauty out of ashes, out of Nathanson's legacy. He promises right in Romans 8:28. And that's the final cap for what I wanted to say, is that God's word says that he will use all things, all things, I forget now how it goes.
For
Romans
good.
8:28.
For good.
For good, right.
For
and
good.
So he's going to take this horrible legacy of Bernard Nathanson and he's going to use it for good.
And you know who's leading the parade now? Young people. Young people, high school students, young college students. Going back to the top of our conversation, I was blown away at the march with Students for Life. That is a huge organization. If you don't know America, it's a huge organization out there with students from high school or even junior high school and college for life. They get it. They don't want this. And they're now leading the parade, whereas Sanger and Nathanson did in their time. We're down to about a minute, Terry Beatley. And again, thank you for coming on the program. Final thoughts. The Hosea Initiative is from that passage that you quoted. That's where you get it. And how do people find you? How do they get this book, which is awesome book? It really is and it's a great read. It's a fast read. How do they get the fact check to get the bottom line details on Nathanson? How can they find you? Okay, just listen carefully because it might sound at first a little confusing. You want the book, go directly to abortionking.com. Abortionking.com, get it, tell all your friends, share the website,
That's directly to my publisher. Get it from my publisher. That's the place to get it.
Okay.
And then for Hosea Initiative, you can do hoseainitiative.org or hoseaforyou.org. Hosea, the number 4, YOU.org.
All right, easy.
Look for books, curriculum, click that tab, and that'll take you down, and you'll see the cost of 1, 5, 10, 20, or a whole case. And we're literally shipping these out by the caseload. It's $200 in a case. Go in with some of your friends, get a whole case. It's the best price. And so let me tell you, I may run out of time. Teenagers are reading the big book and the little book, the fact check booklet. And I have teens who have started book clubs. I have a teen who placed, I think, 11th in the nation for speech and debate, her persuasive speech. She gave it based on what she learned about Dr. Bernard Nathanson in my book.
Good for her. Good for her.
That's it. So go to abortionking.com and hoseainitiative.org.
Terry Beatley, we need to wrap it there. I appreciate you. Thank you for your courage and all the best in getting your literature out there. I'm Terry Gilberg. This is signing off for another edition of Timeline with Terry. We'll see you next time.